In the autumn of 2025, a palpable tension settled over the Horn of Africa. Along the arid, heavily militarized border between Ethiopia and Eritrea, troops from both nations stared each other down. This recent mobilization, a direct consequence of Ethiopia's increasingly vocal demands for sovereign access to the Red Sea, sent alarm bells ringing from Brussels to Washington. Although Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed publicly ruled out an invasion earlier in the year, his nation's landlocked status remains what he terms an existential issue. This simmering dispute over access to Eritrea's coastline is not merely a regional squabble, it is a potential flashpoint with profound implications for international trade, regional stability, and European security, forcing the European Union to watch with bated breath. The EU's focus on this corner of Africa is not new, but the current circumstances have lent it a renewed and honestly desperate urgency. For years, Brussels has walked a fine line with Asmara, attempting to balance its strategic interests with its foundational values. The relationship has been a complex dance of conditional aid, diplomatic pressure, and outright condemnation. Now, with the Horn of Africa more volatile than at any point in recent memory, destabilized by Sudan's catastrophic civil war and the Houthi insurgency in Yemen, Eritrea's role as either a spoiler or a stabilizer has become critically important. The recent military posturing on its border is the latest chapter in a long story, a development that could unravel the fragile peace and unleash chaos across the region. This precarious situation is compounded by Eritrea's own internal dynamics. Under the iron-fisted rule of President Isaias Afwerki since its independence, the nation has become one of the world's most isolated and repressive states. The government's actions have fueled a decades-long exodus of its own people, creating a refugee crisis that lands directly on Europe's doorstep. Therefore, the EU's interest is multi-layered. It is about preventing a new war, managing migration flows, upholding human rights, and securing one of the world's most vital maritime trade routes. The recent border tensions have simply sharpened this focus, reminding policymakers that ignoring the Horn of Africa is a luxury they can no longer afford. The unfolding drama serves as a stark illustration of the geopolitical chessboard on which the EU must now play. Eritrea, once seen as a peripheral actor, now finds itself at the center of competing global interests. As powers like China, Russia, and the Gulf states vie for influence in the Red Sea corridor, the EU is compelled to engage more assertively to protect its own economic and security concerns. The current standoff is more than a border dispute. It is a symptom of a shifting world order, and how the European Union responds will not only shape the future of Eritrea, but also define its own role as a global power in an increasingly contested world. To understand the EU's current predicament with Eritrea, one must look back at the country's difficult birth and its subsequent path of defiant isolation. After a grueling 30-year war for independence from Ethiopia, which it finally achieved in 1993, Eritrea emerged with a fierce sense of self-reliance and a deep suspicion of foreign powers. This spirit was personified by its leader Isaias Afwerki, a former revolutionary commander who has held power ever since. His government, operating under the banner of the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, or PFDJ, never implemented the constitution and has never held a national election. This has solidified Eritrea's status as a one-party state, often compared to North Korea for its opacity and absolute control over its citizenry. The early relationship between the EU and the newly independent Eritrea was cautiously optimistic. Brussels, along with other international partners, offered development aid and diplomatic support, hoping to integrate the nascent state into the global community. However, this hope quickly faded. The devastating border war with Ethiopia from 1998 to 2000, followed by an internal crackdown on all forms of dissent in 2001, set Eritrea on a path of confrontation rather than cooperation. The regime's transactional and often unpredictable foreign policy saw it shift alliances based on perceived threats and opportunities, further complicating any long-term partnership with Western blocs like the EU, who were viewed with deep-seated mistrust. This history of isolation has had profound consequences, both for Eritrea's people and for its diplomatic standing. The government's justification for its authoritarianism has long been the perceived existential threat from its neighbors, particularly Ethiopia. This narrative was used to justify the creation of one of the world's most draconian systems of national service, an indefinite conscription that forces men and women into military or civil servitude for decades. This policy, widely condemned as a form of modern slavery, has become the single greatest driver of the mass exodus of Eritreans, creating a persistent humanitarian and political challenge for the European Union as thousands seek asylum within its borders. Despite a brief thaw following a 2018 peace agreement with Ethiopia, which earned Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed a Nobel Peace Prize, relations have once again frozen over. The EU's engagement has mirrored this roller coaster, with periods of funding for projects like road rehabilitation aimed at fostering regional trade, followed by sharp rebukes and the withdrawal of funds in response to Eritrea's human rights abuses and its role in the Tigray War. The current state of relations is therefore one of mutual wariness, where the EU sees a strategically vital but deeply problematic state, and Eritrea's leadership sees a meddling power that fails to appreciate its security concerns. The European Union's intense focus on Eritrea can be understood through four interconnected pillars of concern, each representing a significant threat to European interests and values. First and foremost is the issue of migration. Eritrea, a nation of approximately 6 million people, is one of the world's largest per capita producers of refugees. The indefinite national service, systemic political repression, and lack of economic opportunity have driven hundreds of thousands to flee. Many embark on treacherous journeys across the Sahara and the Mediterranean, with Europe as their final destination. This persistent flow of asylum seekers places immense strain on EU member states, making the root causes of the exodus a direct and pressing political concern for Brussels. The second pillar is human rights. Eritrea's record is, by any measure, appalling. Freedom House consistently ranks it among the least free countries on Earth, on par with North Korea and Syria. There is no independent media, political opposition is non-existent, and religious freedom is severely curtailed, with only 4 state-sanctioned denominations permitted to operate. Reports from the United Nations and other human rights organizations detail a horrifying landscape of arbitrary detention, torture, and enforced disappearances. For the EU, which publicly champions democracy and human rights as core tenets of its foreign policy, turning a blind eye to such systematic abuses is not only a moral failure, but also undermines its credibility on the world stage. Thirdly, the EU is deeply concerned with regional security. The Horn of Africa is a tinderbox, and Eritrea's actions have often fanned the flames. Its recent alliance with Abiy Ahmed during the brutal Tigray War, its military support for the Sudanese armed forces in the ongoing civil war, and its formation of a new anti-Ethiopia axis with Egypt and Somalia all demonstrate its willingness to engage in high-stakes regional power plays. With Ethiopia now openly agitating for sea access, the risk of a direct conflict with Eritrea is higher than ever. Such a war would not only create a massive humanitarian catastrophe, but would also completely destabilize the entire region, with spillover effects that would inevitably reach Europe. Finally, there is the crucial matter of Eritrea's geostrategic location. Its 1,100-kilometer coastline along the Red Sea places it adjacent to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a choke point through which approximately 15% of global trade passes. The recent Houthi attacks on shipping have underscored the vulnerability of this maritime artery, which is vital for Europe's economy. As global powers like China and Russia increase their military and economic footprint in the region, securing influence and ensuring stability in the Red Sea corridor has become a paramount strategic objective for the EU. Eritrea, with its key ports at Massawa and Assab, is a gatekeeper to this critical waterway, making its orientation a matter of top-tier geopolitical importance. Faced with Eritrea's intransigence, the European Union has deployed a strategy that combines financial leverage with diplomatic pressure, a kind of carrot-and-stick approach that has yielded mixed results. One of the most significant actions came in 2021, when the EU formally pulled the plug on tens of millions of euros in funding. This decision was a direct response to Asmara's lack of cooperation, and crucially, its destructive military involvement in Ethiopia's Tigray conflict, where Eritrean troops were accused of committing widespread atrocities. By terminating key programs under the EU Emergency Trust Fund for Africa, Brussels sent a clear signal that its development aid is not unconditional, and that gross violations of international law would have tangible financial consequences for the regime. Alongside financial measures, the EU has consistently championed international scrutiny of Eritrea's human rights record. Year after year, it has supported the mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea, a position the Eritrean government has vehemently opposed and refused to cooperate with. This diplomatic backing is crucial as it keeps the plight of the Eritrean people on the international agenda and ensures that credible, independent reports on the abuses taking place continue to be produced. This persistent focus on accountability serves as a form of soft power applying normative pressure on a regime that is highly sensitive to its international image, even as it publicly scorns outside criticism. However, the EU's approach has not been purely punitive. Brussels has also attempted to use development projects as a tool for fostering positive change and regional integration. A notable example was the EU's funding for a major road rehabilitation project designed to connect the Ethiopian border with Eritrean ports. The initiative was launched in the hopeful aftermath of the 2018 peace deal with the aim of boosting trade, creating economic opportunities, and giving both nations a stake in maintaining peace. Yet, the subsequent deterioration of relations and Eritrea's role in the Tigray War led the EU to halt disbursements for this very project, illustrating the inherent difficulty of promoting development in a climate of political hostility and conflict. More recently, the EU has been forced to take direct action to secure its interests in the Red Sea. In response to the wave of Houthi attacks that have crippled maritime traffic, the EU launched Operation EUNAVFOR Aspides in February 2024. This naval mission tasked with protecting commercial vessels is a direct assertion of European hard power in the region. Furthermore, by joining the Djibouti Code of Conduct as an observer, the EU has signaled its commitment to working with regional partners to bolster maritime security. These actions demonstrate a pragmatic shift where the EU is complementing its long-term goals of reform with immediate tangible steps to safeguard its vital economic and security lifelines. Looking ahead, the future of EU-Eritrea relations stands at a critical crossroads, with potential scenarios ranging from cautious rapprochement to open confrontation. A best-case, albeit unlikely scenario would involve a gradual internal reform within Eritrea. While a Western-style democracy is not on the horizon, the eventual departure of President Isaias Afwerki could pave the way for a more pragmatic leadership. This new guard might pursue a Chinese-style model of economic liberalization, while maintaining one-party rule, potentially easing the draconian national service to placate the population and attract foreign investment. For the EU, this would present an opportunity for conditional re-engagement, trading development aid, and investment for verifiable improvements in human rights and regional cooperation. Conversely, the worst-case scenario is alarmingly plausible: a full-scale war between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Should Ethiopia's quest for sea access escalate into a military invasion, the entire Horn of Africa would be plunged into chaos. Such a conflict would trigger a humanitarian disaster of immense proportions, sending millions of new refugees fleeing towards Sudan, neighboring countries, and ultimately Europe. It would shatter regional stability, cripple global trade through the Red Sea, and create a power vacuum that could be exploited by extremist groups and rival global powers. For the EU, this would represent a catastrophic failure of diplomacy and a security crisis on its doorstep that would dwarf current challenges. The implications of this situation extend far beyond Eritrea's borders. For its neighbors, particularly Ethiopia and Sudan, continued instability in Asmara poses a direct threat. A weakened or warring Eritrea could destabilize shared borders and reignite dormant conflicts. For the EU, the challenge is twofold. It must navigate the immediate security threats posed by regional conflict and maritime insecurity, while staying true to its long-term commitment to human rights and democratic values. Ceding influence in the Red Sea to competitors like Russia and China, who are untroubled by human rights concerns, would be a strategic defeat. Yet embracing a purely transactional relationship with the Afwerki regime would be a betrayal of its principles. Ultimately, the EU's intense watch over Eritrea is a microcosm of the central dilemma facing European foreign policy in the 21st century. It is a test of whether the Union can effectively balance its pragmatic security interests with its idealistic values in a world defined by great power competition. The signs to watch for are clear troop movements on the border, shifts in regional alliances, and any hint of internal change within Eritrea's opaque regime. The stakes are immense, not just for the long-suffering people of Eritrea, but for the stability of a vital global region and for the very soul of Europe's role in the world. What happens next on the Horn of Africa will demand our full attention.